This is the zone of alienation, home to physics-bending anomalies, artifacts that can turn you into a glowing superhero or be turned into coupons to repair 1/5 of a weapon, and of course you have the iconic mutants who can eat slug rounds for breakfast. But a lot has changed over 15 years, for better and worse. But let's spitfire a couple of important questions. Is it fun? Absolutely. Is it graphically gorgeous? Yes, if you can afford it. Is the game set in Ukraine? And that one's actually a trick question. It isn't. It's actually set in Romania, considering you get robbed at every corner, whether it's by bandits, repair costs, getting taken for a ride by traders, and the pay from quests, especially pre-patch, was akin to modern day slavery, but all in all, it's a great game. But I would still hold off buying it until more patches are released, because why spoil yourself now when the game can get even better through mods and updates, because after all, the game isn't going anywhere, only the hype will, and you should never buy into hype. But having a look at the quests and the story, one thing I really like about these games is the freedom to go off and do whatever you want. If you see a cool unmarked thing on the map, you can go off and explore it, and majority of the time you'll find some great loot that range from a cool weapon or food. It's mostly food, but the main quest is more involved compared to previous games, with some really nice cutscenes, and it gives off that dire situation that puts you right in the center of the zone, trying to navigate the complex politics of it and having to act in your best interests. I'm being as vague as possible to not spoil it, but in short, the Fallout games have you looking for either a relative or a piece of technology. Stalker 2 is similar in the sense, my man just wants a new apartment. Just like in real life, there's a lot of bullshit that you have to do to go through just to get a place to call home. But in regards to the side quests, at release, the rewards of it could range from getting pretty horrible pay to unique weapons and the moral satisfaction of doing the right thing, which is something I genuinely like. Being presented with a conundrum of, do you want a shiny fancy new weapon which could be sold for even more money, or do the right thing and feel good? Of course, some players take the Grand Theft Auto approach of handing over quest items and then killing the NPC to get the best of both worlds, but I view these side quests as an opportunity to loot weapons, and I also make it a personal goal to collect at least one artifact to maximize my income, unless it's a really cool one that has no downsides. But once I have essentially hoarded all the loot, I play Euro Truck Simulator's Zone DLC, where I have to sprint and chug energy drinks as I take a long haul back to base so I can unload the goods. I don't know if you want to call this an OCD, but I could have an infinite amount of every item in the game, and I just still have that compulsive need to loot everything. It's probably why Fallout 4 is my favorite. I probably lost all credibility by saying that, but it's my favorite with mods. But it's just the pleasure out of collecting as much of everything as possible, even though I clearly don't need it. I remember watching a review saying the inventory system was too punishing, even though they had like 50 things in their inventory, but the purpose I give this game is to plan ahead and take what you need and make smart decisions on what loot you want to leave with. If you know you're going into an easy area to do a basic quest, just like in Zombieland, one of the many rules is to travel light. If you're going to be going into a very hostile area, bring extra ammo. But one issue heaps of people have brought up, and I don't agree with it that much. For reference, I played between veteran and the easiest just to test them out, and I felt like there was an abundance of loot. This isn't the anomaly gamma player in me speaking, because if you get up to the halfway point of the game and you don't have a stash that looks like this, I feel like we are playing the game in two different ways. Because I'm a tactical shooter player, that's not a brag, it sounds like I'm bragging, but I play it as a more slower and methodical playstyle. I try to map out a location to see what is the best route and plan of attack, and I also try to use stealth and only go for headshots. I do this to preserve ammo and my weapon's condition, and I find there's just way too much ammo unless it's a rare kind like 308 or NATO rounds. Of course, that can vary depending on where you are on the map and story, but this leads on to the economy, which pre-patch was pretty unfair, so thankfully they've worked on it. But I didn't agree it was unfair at first, because I was using the most basic equipment and repair costs were manageable. It wasn't until I got a $30,000 repair bill for one of my suits and I decided to just buy it brand new. Out of spite. It's not about the money, it's about sending a message. And this segues onto another hot topic I see people mention, and that is mutants were an ammo tax. Thank you GSC for reducing their HP, because I was curious. I fought a bloodsucker in Shadow of Chernobyl and the difference was pretty grand. Considering my crappy double barrel could take down a bloodsucker in a fraction of the time you could in Stalker 2 pre-patch, and they also didn't have that annoying stun lock effect. I wonder if that annoys anyone else as well. But the thing is, mutants are a threat. You're supposed to defend yourself against them. It's like holding the mentality of like, oh, someone broke into my house and I only have an FN57. It's actually just cheaper to let the robbers loot my house than use this kind of ammo. And people do say that, oh, you don't even get rewarded by killing a mutant. You can't even loot them, which is something that was only in Shadow of Chernobyl. People say, oh, all the previous games had it, only Anomaly and SOC had it. However, maybe taking a step forward and allowing us to loot these, I don't think is an entirely terrible idea, but I also believe that the players shouldn't be constantly rewarded just for doing something as simple as defend themselves. But I'd love to hear your thoughts of that in the comments. But staying on topic of the mutants, I will say they completely overdid it with the bloodsuckers, and they fell into the same trap as Fallout 4, where they give you some good stuff right at the start, and they showed off the Big Mac equivalent of these franchises, which just ruins the mystery and fear factor behind them. Because I think it was in Shadow of Chernobyl where I encountered my first bloodsucker at S.T.A.L.K.E.R base. I wasn't expecting it. I couldn't remember when and where it was gonna pop up, and it scared the absolute crap out of me as you see it fastly running towards you, just this little shadow, and you got the little spinny orange light. It was really intense. Because the thing is, you know that they're in the game, they're this grand, fearful mutant, but you don't know when it's gonna happen. But when it comes to the AI of the mutants, they can be a bit of a hit or a miss. They definitely need work. This controller just had enough. It wasn't putting up much of a fight, and this Buria, I don't know how to pronounce it, speaks to me on a spiritual level, because this is exactly how I look after editing this video for hours and leaving my room to ask my mum for tendies. But my advice, always carry a shotgun with you, because making a mutant eat slugs will drop them in a pretty reasonable amount of time and diminish the wear and tear and consumption of your primary weapon. Also, going on to something completely different, I will actually pay a modder $5 to make a mod that extends the chest and adds an auto sort feature like in Tarkov, because once again, I don't know what's wrong with my brain, but I love organizing my storage system in a specific way. I do this in real life, and I could do this in any video game with the storage mechanic. But the weapon handling thankfully doesn't have that effect from the older games where you miss a perfectly aimed shot point blank with a pistol, but is rather fairly consistent with other shooters on the market. But a lot of them do have a fair amount of kick, especially if they aren't upgraded, and you aren't short of choices. You have the classics and some newly implemented NATO equipment, coupled with some great animations that make me reminiscent of Far Cry 2 when they jam. But for me personally, I'll go more on performance later on. The gameplay feel is really nice and I'm really enjoying it. But now, it's gonna be dicey, but it's time to talk about one of the biggest issues, and it's one that GSC has acknowledged, and I hope so badly they improve on it, or modders are doing it themselves, and that is the scuffed A-Life system. And if you don't know what A-Life is, just turn the computer off and go outside. But all jokes aside, it's directly responsible for that grand world feeling the older Stalkers had. To say nothing happens in Stalker 2 when you run from point to point is a bit of a lie. Sometimes you'll encounter a distress call over the radio and you can investigate. You might find some juicy pieces of information and you can get rewarded handsomely, and some of these quests are pretty funny. But it's so hard to express into words, and I don't know if anyone else feels this way, but compared to the previous game, the world feels a little more bland and empty. It's beautiful. Some fantastic places to explore, but I just meant the feeling as you walk around. You know, go and install the trilogy right now, spend 10 minutes walking around, and I'm sure you'll see something acting independently. For me, I saw a pack of dogs laying into a dead body, and I thought, should I investigate to see if he has any loot, or should I just let it be? And I didn't even know there was an actual animation of them attacking the body. I feel like in Stalker 2, you're the center of attention. Everything revolves around you, and that's not a good thing, because in the previous games, you were just another actor in the zone doing their own thing, trying to survive. And even on the death screen of these games, you can see the parallels between them. In the trilogy, you can just see your lifeless body flaying around. But but the zone just keeps on going without you because you're not the main character. Everything revolves around the zone. You know, you actually had an impact and that's it. You're dead. You're done for. Stalker 2's death screen or animation feels a little goofier, and I just thought, oh, you know, I died again. Time to reload a save. It's not like the world will keep progressing without me. It's a mental thing. It's not really like an actual gameplay element. If you can kind of understand what I mean, I'm going completely off script and spitballing here. And the reason why is because there's a range that things will spawn around you. Things aren't in the world, you know, doing their own thing. You walk around, and I can demonstrate this with a clip where, you know, I turn around and then I turn back around and suddenly some people just start shooting me out of thin air. It was kind of cool. They did shoot at another faction. That was cool. But the fact they just materialize out of thin air like which some people will say, oh, it's just an anomaly. Come on, it's not a good thing, and they really have to work on this because I believe that this is a very defining thing about the Stalker franchise. But moving on to the graphics, this game is gorgeous. I thought Metro Exodus looked great, but even in some comparisons to real life, it can be pretty hard to tell the difference between the game and real life. But of course, as gaming switches to Unreal Engine 5, it leaves a lot of people behind, especially since the previous games and Anomaly are very accessible in 2024 for most PCs. They're over 15 years old, why wouldn't they be? But based purely on statistics, chances are running the game beyond high settings for you, it'll run very poorly. And this isn't something I can really give an opinion on because I run the game at 1440p on high, and I'm able to use frame generation, and it runs at no less than 120 FPS most of the time, unless I go into a very NPC heavy area, which means just my CPU is partially to blame and also the game's optimization. But at the cost of making the game much harder to run for the average person, it creates a truly breathtaking experience. And while there are moments where colors pop, it stays true to the grey and miserable atmosphere. But I feel like some people might say the older games did it better in terms of graphical atmosphere, if you get what I mean, but I disagree with that. It's because the worst graphics make things feel grittier, but I just love the physics bending anomalies as they collect particles from their surroundings. And the fact you can actually inspect artifacts now, and they no longer feel like a non-tangible thing with a low-res JPEG, but rather presenting itself as a living entity that moves. I also love the dynamic weather. One minute it's bright and sunny, then the next minute it looks like there's a rad storm from Fallout 4. This does lead to the day-night cycle. I feel like the majority of my playthrough was dark or got dark too quickly, but you can just use a bed to skip it. But night combat can be a bit of a challenge, but more on that later on. The lighting can be great at times to create this horror effect as you explore an abandoned medical facility, and this stays in tune with the X-ray engine, which was just insane. Some of the best lighting in my opinion. But one thing that's just pretty frustrating, and that's the NVGs. Why don't we get them? Because the night combat is an absolute pain, especially when it comes to stealth. It's so inconsistent. You could shine a flashlight right in front of their face and they won't react, or they can see you from like 50 meters away and they'll be able to laser you with very good accuracy. And the flashlight doesn't help and can actually make night combat even harder, especially if it's an open space. But it honestly makes sense because the NPCs get NVGs, but for some reason you don't. But the face models are also highly detailed, which goes hand in hand if you turn on the English voice acting and you're speaking to someone with a British accent. And the mutants now have a shiny new coat of paint, and it makes them even more terrifying where you're exploring and you can just hear these bloodsuckers in a cave and then it just pops out at you. But just a quick note as well, I think GSC missed the mark by having the characters speak with a British or American accent. I don't think there's anything wrong, even though people will vehemently defend this, but I don't think there's anything wrong with using English voice acting in the older games. But in this one, I don't understand why they couldn't get Sergei from accounting with a Slavic accent, and apparently they didn't do this because there's different dialects and accents of the Ukrainian language, and they wanted to mimic this in English, but I'm ignorant. You could get any of these languages and I couldn't tell the difference, which is why, in my opinion, they should have just stuck with the Slavic accent. But now the last thing we got to talk about, and it's one of the big fat elephants in the room, and that is the bugs. Personally, I've only experienced a handful of them that range from NPCs clipping into things, a man showing my latest sleep paralysis hallucination of just floating in the air, but there's also bugs that did lock you out of main quest related content. One of them's thankfully been patched, but it's a full release game. I didn't get to do it in my playthrough, so I'm gonna mention it anyways. And it was to speak to Doctor Who's his name, and I won't bother to pronounce that, and the door wouldn't open. Tried many fixes to no avail, and it does remind me of S.T.A.L.K.E.R Sky in Yanta, when there's this one mutant that's hiding in the vicinity of the base, and it'll go into lockdown and you can't get into it unless you deal with it, and I always found that frustrating about that game. But I also went to Zalicia, and I couldn't get into this building when I'm pretty sure I should have been able to, and there was a quest associated with it, and minor spoiler, but you know, I lost the town. It was wiped off the map, and even though I responded to a distress call, I couldn't do anything about it, and I missed out on these quests. And this is just one of the big reasons why I encourage you to not buy it yet. Even though it's seen some patches, you have to give it time so it can get to the best state possible, coupled in with the mods to really have that one true great first experience. You know, it's like, do you want to go to a prostitute or do you want to save yourself? That's subjective. Actually, that's a stupid fucking example. This is why I make a script. But look, all things considered, if you have a beefy computer and you can easily spend $90, it's a fantastic game. You will not be disappointed if you can tolerate some of these bugs, and also with the assumption that all these problems are going to get fixed in the future. However, if you don't have the best PC, it's best to wait for patches, especially in regards to optimization, even though there are mods already out there to rectify this. The game won't go anywhere, like I said, but the hype will, which you should never buy into hype. But I'm going to end today's video there. If you did enjoy it, please do consider leaving a like, subscribing, and sharing the video with your friends and family. My name is Tan2, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Peace.